Thomas walked slowly down the dusty main street of Millbrook, his worn boots making soft sounds on the gravel. The evening sun cast long shadows between the small shops and houses. He had been traveling for weeks, looking for work and a place to rest his tired heart. His old truck had broken down just outside town, and now he carried everything he owned in a single backpack. The bag felt heavy on his shoulders, not because of what was inside, but because it held all that remained of his old life. Thomas had lost his family farm 3 months ago, when the bank took it away. Since then, he had been drifting from place to place, feeling lost and alone. The farm had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had built the red barn with his own hands. His father had planted the apple trees that lined the front drive. Thomas had grown up running through those fields, learning to milk cows and fix fences. But bad weather and poor crops had made it impossible to pay the bills. The day the bankmen came with their papers, Thomas felt like his whole world was ending. Now, as he walked through this unknown town, Thomas tried not to think about what he had lost. The memories hurt too much. Instead, he focused on putting one foot in front of the other, just like he had done in the 7 other towns he had visited since leaving home. The main street of Millbrook was quiet in the evening light. A few people sat on their front porches, enjoying the cooler air after a warm day. Some children played with a ball in a small park. The scene looked peaceful, but Thomas had learned not to hope for it too much. Every town looked friendly from the outside, but people often changed when they saw a stranger with old clothes and sad eyes. As he walked past a small inn called Mary's Rest, he noticed a kind-looking woman with grey hair sweeping the front steps. Her movements were gentle and patient, like someone who took care in everything she did. The inn itself looked welcoming, with flower boxes under the windows and a wooden sign that creaked softly in the evening breeze. The woman looked up from her sweeping and saw Thomas walking by. Instead of looking away or frowning like most people did, she stopped what she was doing and watched him with curious, caring eyes. When she saw how tired and sad he looked, she set her broom aside and took a step toward him. "You look like you could use a warm meal and a good night's sleep," Mary said with a gentle smile. Her voice was soft and caring, like a mother talking to her child who had been playing outside all day. Thomas stopped walking and looked at her with surprise. Most people in other towns had looked at him with suspicion because of his old clothes and tired appearance. They saw his backpack and worn boots and assumed he was trouble. Some had even crossed the street to avoid him. He had expected the same treatment here in Millbrook. "I don't have much money," Thomas said honestly, looking down at his worn boots. The leather was cracked and faded from so much walking. He only had $23 left in his wallet, and he needed to make it last until he found work. Mary's smile grew warmer, and she took another step closer. "Don't you worry about that right now. Come inside and let's get you fed first. We can talk about everything else later." She turned and walked toward the front door of the inn, then looked back to see if Thomas was following. Her grey hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore a clean apron over her dress. Everything about her seemed honest and kind. Thomas hesitated for a moment. He had learned to be careful about accepting help from strangers. Sometimes people were kind at first but changed their minds when they learned more about his situation. But something about this woman felt different. Her offer seemed to come from a genuine place of caring, not from pity or obligation. As Thomas followed Mary into the cozy inn, he felt something he hadn't felt in months, a small spark of hope. The inside of the inn smelled like fresh bread and coffee. Clean wooden tables sat near windows with cheerful curtains. Everything looked well cared for and welcoming. Maybe this little town would be different, Thomas thought to himself. Maybe here he could find not just a place to sleep, but a reason to keep going. The past 3 months had been so dark and lonely. He had begun to wonder if he would ever feel like himself again. The warm light from the inn's windows seemed to welcome him home, even though he was still a stranger. For the first time since losing his farm, Thomas allowed himself to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. He didn't know what would happen next, but Mary's simple act of kindness had given him something precious, hope that good people still existed in the world. The next morning, Thomas woke up in the most comfortable bed he had slept in for months. The mattress was soft but supportive, and the sheets smelled like fresh lavender. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then he remembered the kind woman named Mary and a gentle voice offering him help the night before. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, creating warm golden patches on the wooden floor. Thomas could hear birds singing outside and the distant sound of people starting their day. Most importantly, he could smell bacon cooking downstairs, along with the rich aroma of fresh coffee and something that might have been homemade biscuits. His stomach reminded him that he had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days. Before coming to Millbrook, he had been surviving on cheap bread and whatever food he could afford from gas station stores. The smell of real cooking made him realize how hungry he truly was. Thomas got dressed quickly and made his way downstairs to the dining room. The wooden stairs creaked softly under his feet, but it was a comfortable, homey sound. When he reached the bottom, he found Mary and a tall man waiting at a table set with plates, cups, and more food than Thomas had seen in one place for a long time. "Morning, son," the man said, standing up and extending his hand for a firm handshake. "I'm Robert, Mary's husband. She told me all about meeting you last night." Robert was a tall man with kind eyes and strong hands that spoke of years of hard work. His hair was mostly grey, like Mary's, but his grip was still firm and his back was straight. He wore simple work clothes that were clean and well-maintained. Everything about him suggested someone who took pride in honest work and treating people fairly. "Mary told me about your situation," Robert continued as they all sat down at the table. "We've been talking this morning, and we have a proposition for you." Thomas sat down carefully in the wooden chair, trying not to let his hopes rise too high. He had learned over the past 3 months that life often disappointed him when he expected too much. Too many times he had thought someone might help him, only to have doors close in his face when people learned more about his circumstances. Mary began filling his plate with scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, buttered toast, and a fresh biscuit that was still warm from the oven. The simple act of someone serving him food with care made Thomas feel emotional, but he tried to hide it by focusing on what Robert was saying. "Our handyman, old Jim, retired last month," Mary explained as she poured fresh coffee into Thomas's cup. The coffee was strong and hot, better than anything he had tasted in weeks. "We need someone to help round the inn with all sorts of jobs. Fixing things that break, painting when walls need freshening up, taking care of the yard work, helping guests with their luggage, things like that." Thomas took a bite of the eggs and had to control himself from eating too quickly. They were perfectly cooked, fluffy and seasoned just right. As he chewed, he listened carefully to what Mary was telling him. "It's not much pay," Robert added honestly, "but you'd have your own room upstairs, and all your meals would be included. Mary is a fine cook, as you can probably tell from that breakfast. We'd also help you get back on your feet in other ways. Maybe help you save up some money for whatever comes next in your life." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. The kindness these strangers were showing him was almost too much to believe. He had to blink back tears and take a sip of coffee to steady himself before he could speak. "Why? Would you trust me like this?" Thomas asked, his voice slightly shaky. "You don't even know me. I could be anyone. I could take your money and disappear, or cause trouble, or not work hard enough to earn what you're offering." Robert leaned forward across the table, his expression warm and sincere. "Thomas, Mary and I have been running this inn for 25 years. We've learned to read people pretty well in that time. Sometimes you just know when someone is good people. We can see you're honest and hardworking. The way you speak, the way you look us in the eye, the way you're worried about being worthy of our trust. Those aren't the thoughts of someone who wants to take advantage." Mary nodded in agreement. Everyone deserves a chance to get back on their feet when life knocks them down. We've been blessed with a good business and a comfortable life. It feels right to share that blessing when we can. That very day, Thomas started working round the inn. He fixed a squeaky door in one of the guest rooms, painted a section of fence that had been weathered by winter storms, and helped Mary plant new flowers in the garden boxes under the front windows. Each task felt good in a way that surprised him. The work gave him purpose again, made him feel useful and needed throughout the day. Other townspeople stopped by the inn, and Mary introduced Thomas to them. There was Elizabeth, a cheerful woman who ran the bakery next door and immediately offered to save him fresh bread each morning. William, the local mechanic, heard about Thomas's broken truck and offered to take a look at it to see if it could be repaired affordably. Each person Thomas met treated him with genuine warmth and interest. They asked about where he had come from and listened to his story without judgment. Several people mentioned jobs he might be able to do round town when he had free time from the inn, ways he could earn a little extra money. By evening, as Thomas sat on the inn's front porch watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, he realized something wonderful was happening. These people weren't just being polite because Mary and Robert had asked them to be nice to him. They genuinely cared about him as a person and wanted to see him succeed. For the first time since losing his farm, Thomas felt like he belonged somewhere. Maybe his life could get better after all. 3 weeks later, Thomas had become part of Millbrook's daily rhythm, like a piece that had always belonged in the town's puzzle. Every morning, he would wake up before sunrise and help Mary prepare breakfast for the inn's guests. He had learned exactly how she liked the coffee made and could flip pancakes without burning them. After breakfast, he would spend his day maintaining the inn, fixing whatever needed repair, and helping neighbors round town with odd jobs that came up. The townspeople had accepted him completely, treating him not like an outsider who had wandered into their community, but like someone who had always been meant to live there. Thomas was starting to feel like himself again for the first time since losing his farm. The constant worry and sadness that had weighed on his shoulders for months was slowly lifting, replaced by a sense of belonging and usefulness. He had repaired Mrs. Johnson's front gate, helped William at the garage when things got busy, and even assisted the local pastor with organizing supplies for the food pantry. Each small job made Thomas feel more connected to the fabric of the community. People would wave to him on the street and call out his name. He was no longer just Mary and Robert's helper. He was Thomas, a valued member of Millbrook. One rainy Tuesday morning, while Thomas was fixing a loose board on the inn's front porch, Elizabeth from the bakery came running across the street through the puddles. Her usually cheerful face was streaked with tears, and she was breathing hard from running. She burst through the front door of the inn, calling for Mary and Robert. "There's been an accident," Elizabeth cried, her voice breaking with emotion. My husband David slipped on the wet floor in the bakery this morning and hurt his back badly. I had to call an ambulance to take him to the hospital in the next town. Mary immediately put her arms round Elizabeth, offering comfort while Robert brought her a chair and a cup of hot tea to help calm her nerves. Thomas set down his hammer and came inside, concerned about what had happened to David, who had always been kind to him. Elizabeth continued through her tears. The doctor says David hurt his back so badly that he can't work for at least 2 months, maybe longer. He can't lift anything heavy or stand for long periods. But without him, I don't know how I'll keep the bakery open. There's too much work for one person. Especially all the early morning baking. Thomas saw Mary and Robert exchange word looks. He had learned in his short time in Millbrook that Elizabeth's bakery was much more than just a business. It was the heart of the community. The bakery was where people gathered each morning to drink coffee and catch up on news. It was where mothers brought their children for special treats on birthdays. People came from neighboring villages just to buy Elizabeth's famous bread and pastries, which brought important business to the whole town. If the bakery had to close, even temporarily, it would hurt everyone in Millbrook. The town would lose its gathering place, Elizabeth and David would lose their income, and the community would lose something precious that brought everyone together. Thomas thought about David lying in a hospital bed, worried about his family and his business. He thought about Elizabeth, who had been so welcoming to him from his first day in town, now facing the possibility of losing everything she and her husband had worked to build. I used to help my grandmother bake when I was young, Thomas said quietly from where he stood near the doorway. Everyone in the room turned to look at him, surprised by his soft-spoken offer. His grandmother had taught him to make bread from scratch when he was just 10 years old. During summer visits to her house, they would wake up early and work together in her kitchen, mixing dough and waiting for it to rise. She had shown him how to tell when bread was perfectly baked just by the sound it made when you tapped the crust. Those were some of his happiest childhood memories. I'm not a professional baker like David, Thomas continued, stepping further into the room. But I remember a lot of what my grandmother taught me. I could try to help Elizabeth until David gets better. If she thinks that might work. Elizabeth's tear-filled eyes suddenly filled with hope instead of despair. She looked at Thomas as if he had just offered her the most precious gift in the world. Would you really do that? I mean, I can't pay much extra money right now, with David's medical bills and everything. You don't need to pay me anything, Thomas replied firmly. This town has given me so much since I arrived here. Mary and Robert gave me a job and a home. You've brought me fresh bread and always had a kind word. Everyone here has treated me like family when I was a stranger. It's time I gave something back for the next several weeks. Thomas split his time between the inn and the bakery. He would finish his evening work at Mary's Rest, then go to bed early so he could wake up at 4 in the morning, in the dark, quiet hours before dawn. He would walk to the bakery and help Elizabeth prepare the day's bread and pastries. His hands, which had felt useless and clumsy when he lost his farm, were now creating something beautiful and needed again. The smell of fresh bread rising, the satisfaction of pulling perfect loaves from the oven, the grateful smiles of customers who depended on their morning routine, all of it filled Thomas with a sense of purpose he had thought he might never feel again. The townspeople were amazed by his dedication and kindness. Even though he was tired from working 2 jobs, Thomas always had a smile and kind words for everyone he met. Children would wave to him on the street and call out good morning. Elderly residents would stop to chat when they saw him, asking about David's recovery and praising Thomas for stepping up to help. Thomas realized that helping others had healed something deep inside his heart. He wasn't just surviving anymore, drifting from place to place without direction. He was truly living, again, with purpose and meaning that came from being needed and being able to make a difference in other people's lives. 2 months later, just as David was getting back on his feet and returning to the bakery, Thomas's peaceful new life was shattered by an unexpected visitor. The morning had started like any other, with Thomas helping Mary serve breakfast to the inn's guests before heading outside to tend the vegetable garden that had become one of his favorite responsibilities. He was kneeling between rows of tomato plants, carefully pulling weeds that had sprouted after the previous night's rain, when he heard the sound of an expensive car pulling into the inn's gravel driveway. The engine was much quieter and smoother than the pickup trucks and older cars that usually visited Millbrook. Thomas looked up to see a shiny black sedan that seemed completely out of place in their simple town. The car was spotless, as if it had just come from a car wash, and it probably cost more money than most families in Millbrook made in an entire year. When the driver's door opened, Thomas felt his heart skip a beat and his hands stop moving among the plants. His brother Michael stepped out of the car, adjusting his perfectly pressed business suit and looking round at the small town with an expression that clearly showed he thought he had arrived. In the middle of nowhere, Michael's leather shoes had never walked on dirt roads, and his tie probably cost more than Thomas made in a week at the inn. Michael spotted Thomas kneeling in the garden with soil under his fingernails and wore clothes that showed the honest wear of daily labor. His expression was serious and determined, like a businessman who had traveled a long distance to complete an important transaction. "Thomas," Michael said, walking across the yard with quick, purposeful steps, "I've been looking for you everywhere. Do you have any idea how many towns I visited trying to track you down? You disappeared without telling anyone where you were going or how to reach you." Thomas stood up slowly, brushing the rich, dark soil from his hands onto his work pants. Seeing Michael brought back a flood of painful memories he had been working hard to forget. His brother represented everything about his old life that had caused him pain: the failed farm, the financial struggles, the feeling of being a disappointment to his family. In Millbrook, Thomas had found peace, purpose, and people who valued him for who he was rather than what he owned. Now Michael's presence made that peace feel fragile and threatened, like a soap bubble that might burst at any moment. "I needed to get away after losing the farm," Thomas said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of those difficult months. "I couldn't stay in the same place where everything reminded me of what I had lost. Every field, every barn, every road brought back memories that were too painful to bear." Michael's expression became even more serious and businesslike, the way it always did when he had important news to share. "That's exactly why I'm here, Thomas. I have news about the farm. Very important news that could change everything for you and give you back what you lost." Thomas felt his stomach drop like a heavy stone falling into deep, dark water. The farm was the source of his greatest pain, the thing he had been trying so hard to move past and forget. He had worked for months to build a new life in Millbrook, creating new routines and new relationships that didn't remind him of his failure. Now Michael was threatening to bring all of that pain crushing back into his carefully rebuilt world. "What about the farm?" Thomas asked, though a large part of him didn't want to know the answer. "The bank already took it. All the papers were signed. The lawyers said it was final, and there was nothing anyone could do to change it." Michael's face suddenly lit up with excitement, as if he was about to deliver the most wonderful news anyone had ever received. "That's just it, Thomas. There was a legal mistake in the foreclosure paperwork. The bank's lawyers made a serious error in the documents they filed. You still have a legal claim to the land. It's complicated legal stuff, but the bottom line is that the farm could still be yours if you want to fight for it. Thomas stared at his brother, trying to process what he was hearing. The words didn't seem real after all these months of believing that chapter of his life was closed forever. But here's the really exciting part. Michael continued, pulling out his expensive smartphone and showing Thomas some numbers on the screen. I've been working with lawyers and real estate people for weeks to sort this out. I've found investors who are very interested in your land for a development project. They want to buy it from you for 3 times what the bank said it was worth. 3 times, Thomas. The amount of money Michael showed him was more than Thomas had ever dreamed of having. It was enough to buy the nicest truck on any car lot, enough to travel to every country he had ever wanted to see, enough to purchase a much bigger and better farm in a place with rich soil and perfect weather. It was enough money to solve every financial problem he might ever have and to live comfortably for the rest of his life without ever worrying about paying bills. You could start over somewhere new, Michael said, gesturing round at the simple buildings and quiet streets of Millbrook. Somewhere much better than this little town that's barely on the map. You could live anywhere you wanted, maybe near the ocean, or in the mountains, or in a big city with museums and restaurants and entertainment. You'd never have to work as a handyman again. You could do anything you wanted with your life. That night, Thomas found it impossible to sleep. His mind was spinning like a wheel that wouldn't stop turning, filled with thoughts about Michael's offer and what it might mean for his future. The numbers his brother had shown him kept flashing in his memory, along with images of all the things that money could buy and all the places it could take him. Finally, he gave up trying to sleep and got dressed. He walked slowly through Millbrook's quiet streets, thinking deeply about the choice that now lay before him like a fork in the road. The night air was cool and fresh, and the town was peaceful under the light of a nearly full moon. The money would indeed solve all his financial problems forever and give him security he had never known. But as he walked past the bakery where he had worked so many early mornings helping Elizabeth, Thomas felt his heart grow heavy with confusion. Through the darkened windows, he could see the ovens where he had rediscovered the joy of creating something with his hands, something that brought happiness to other people. He continued his slow walk and passed the inn where Mary and Robert had shown him kindness when he had nothing to offer in return except his willingness to work hard. These people had become much more than employers or friends. They had become the family he had always wished for. This small town had become much more than just a place to stay. It had become his true home. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Mary found him sitting on the inn's front porch, staring out at the quiet street. She appeared with 2 steaming cups of coffee and a concerned expression that reminded Thomas of how a loving mother looks at a troubled child. "You look troubled, son," Mary said gently, settling into the wooden chair beside him and offering him one of the warm cups. "I heard you leave the house hours ago and saw you walking round town from my bedroom window." Thomas accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands round the warm ceramic mug. He told Mary everything about Michael's unexpected visit and the incredible offer to buy back his family's farm. He explained about the legal mistake that had been discovered, the investors who wanted to pay such an enormous amount of money, and the new life of comfort and security that the money could provide. Mary listened to every word without interrupting or judging, occasionally nodding to show she understood, but never trying to influence his thinking. When Thomas finished explaining the situation, Mary was quiet for whole minutes, sipping her coffee and watching the sun slowly rise over the rooftops of their small town. Finally, she spoke in the soft, caring voice that had first welcomed Thomas to Millbrook months earlier. Thomas, Robert, and I love having you here more than words can express. You've become like the son we never had. But we want what's best for your life and your future, not what's best for our feelings. If this money can give you a better life and more security, then you should seriously consider taking it. Her completely selfless response, her willingness to encourage him to leave even though it would cause her pain, made Thomas's decision suddenly crystal clear. In that moment of perfect clarity, he realized that the best possible life wasn't about having money or starting over in some new place. The best life was about being where you are truly loved and where you can love others in return. The next morning, Thomas woke up with a clear mind and a peaceful heart. He had spent the entire night thinking about Michael's offer, walking the familiar streets of Millbrook and remembering all the moments of kindness he had experienced since arriving in this small town. Now, he knew exactly what he needed to do. Thomas found Michael sitting at a corner table in the town's small diner, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. His brother was dressed in another expensive suit and looked confident and relaxed, probably assuming that Thomas had spent the night thinking about all the wonderful things he could do with so much mo. The diner was a cozy place with red vinyl booths and a friendly waitress named Helen who knew everyone's usual order. The smell of bacon and eggs filled the air, and several local farmers were having their morning coffee at the counter, discussing the weather and their crops. "I've made my decision," Thomas said simply, sliding into the booth across from Michael. His voice was calm and sure. Without any doubt or hesitation, Michael looked up from his newspaper with a satisfied smile, clearly expecting to hear that Thomas was ready to sign papers and claim his fortune. "I knew you'd come to your senses. When do you want to meet with the lawyers? We could drive to the city today and get everything started. I'm grateful you found me and told me about the farm," Thomas continued, looking his brother directly in the eyes. "I appreciate all the work you've done with the lawyers and finding these investors, but I'm not interested in selling." Michael's confident expression changed completely. His mouth fell open and he stared at Thomas as if his brother had just spoken in a foreign language. "What did you say?" "I said I'm not selling," Thomas repeated gently but firmly. "I don't want the money, and I don't want to leave Millbrook." Michael set down his coffee cup with a sharp clink against the saucer. "Are you completely crazy? This is your chance to have everything you lost and more. You could be rich, Thomas. Rich enough to never worry about money again for the rest of your life." Thomas smiled peacefully, an expression that came from deep inside his heart. "I already have everything I need, Michael. I have work that matters and makes me feel useful. I have people who care about me and who I care about in return. I have a place where I belong and where I'm valued for who I am, not what I own. You can't put a price on those things." Michael shook his head in disbelief and frustration. But this little town, these simple people who probably never traveled more than 50 miles from where they were born. You could have so much more than this. You could see the world, live in a mansion, drive expensive cars. These simple people saved my life," Thomas interrupted gently, his voice full of warmth and gratitude. "When I arrived here, I was broken and hopeless. I felt like a complete failure who had nothing to offer anyone. They gave me purpose again and helped me remember what it feels like to be needed and appreciated." Thomas looked round the diner at the familiar faces of people who had become his friends and neighbors. "They showed me that family isn't just about blood or growing up in the same house. Real family is about the people who choose to love and support you when you have nothing to give them in return except your best efforts and honest work." Michael leaned back in the booth, studying his brother's face as if trying to understand a puzzle he couldn't solve. I don't get it. Thomas, you're choosing to stay poor in a tiny town when you could be wealthy anywhere in the world. I'm not poor, Thomas replied with quiet confidence. I'm rich in all the ways that really matter. I wake up every morning knowing that people depend on me and trust me. I go to sleep every night knowing that I made a difference in someone's day. That's worth more than any amount of money. Michael left Millbrook that afternoon, driving away in his expensive car with an expression of confusion and disappointment. He couldn't understand his brother's choice, but Thomas felt completely at peace with his decision. As he watched Michael's car disappear down the road, Thomas felt no regret, only a deep sense of contentment. 6 months later, the town council officially hired Thomas as Millbrook's maintenance supervisor, a position created specifically for him. Mary and Robert had grown to love him like the son they had never had, and the whole town celebrated when he announced his decision to stay permanently. Using his small savings and a loan from the local bank, Thomas bought a little white house on Oak Street, just 2 blocks from the inn where his new life had begun. The house was small but perfect for his needs, with a front porch where he could sit in the evenings and a backyard where he could plant a vegetable garden. It needed some repairs and fresh paint, but Thomas enjoyed the work of making it truly his own. On warm summer evenings, Thomas would sit on his front porch in an old rocking chair, watching his neighbors walk by with their dogs or children. People would wave and call out friendly greetings, asking about his day or sharing news about their families. Children would stop to show him their drawings from school, and Elizabeth still brought him fresh bread every Sunday morning, refusing to let him pay for it. Thomas had learned one of life's most important lessons, that sometimes losing everything you think you want is the only way to discover everything you actually need. He had come to Millbrook as a drifter looking for nothing more than a place to sleep and maybe some temporary work. Instead, he had found something infinitely more valuable, a place to call home and a family that had chosen to love him. The man who had once felt worthless and completely alone now knew with absolute certainty that he mattered deeply to many people. That knowledge filled his heart with a joy and contentment that no amount of money could ever buy. The end.